Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.8 top lane tier list. So if you're into the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. Once again, I am focusing towards mid-elo with this one, trying to encapsulate a large audience and give a generalistic idea of what I'd recommend to claim. This doesn't really encapsulate elite play. Once again, it's kind of tailored towards your average player, a bit above average in certain circumstances. So let's get into it. The D tier is once again going to consist of Lee Sin. I wouldn't recommend playing him in the top lane. He's decent in the jungle at the moment. Definitely recommend playing him there. In the in the top lane though, just not really something I would recommend. He tends to have too many losing lanes. He doesn't have the same kind of itemization / wave clear he had last season. The accessibility of like his E plus Gore Drinker made him very oppressive at certain points, but they did end up narrowing that down. And now that it's in more of a balance, or was a balanced spot last season, it just doesn't really have the same functionality this season. So I'd very much recommend avoiding it. Moving on to the C tier, we're gonna have Cassante, who is very elite skewed. I would not recommend playing Cassante at the moment. He is in a pretty rough spot. He feels kind of sluggish to play, if anything, in his current state. Lowering the speed on his E, being locked into his W cast animation. Alongside that, you no longer slow on your empowered Qs. It just makes him feel pretty bad. That combined with the fact that he's just at a weaker point. He's not someone I would recommend unless you're very proficient at him and you're playing him at a very high level. Moving on, so Yasuo is also going to be my C tier. He's not terrible within the top lane, don't get me wrong. If you are use him as an answer to certain matchups where you can have value through wind wall against a lot of ranged options. We saw it come out against Twisted Fate in the LEC. It was a pretty good lane. You can function quite nicely there. Then he can function well within top lane. But as a generalistic pick, I wouldn't recommend Yasuo unless maybe you are auto-filled and you're very proficient of a pick. Yeah, he's going to be in the C tier for the moment. Nah is also going to be in the C tier. He's not doing too hot this season. Trinity Force is a bit of a weaker item at the moment, and he's kind of struggling from it. Karma also going to be in the C tier. Karma's actually close to the D tier, if anything, at the moment. She's struggling a huge amount in the top lane. She just doesn't find the same success with her builds like she was a couple patches ago. She received loads of nerfs. In compensation more recently, she received some E buffs, which just don't really help her in the top lane, so she is still very much underperforming. Would not recommend her as a top lane pick. Rumble within solo queue, or within mid-elo solo queue, tends to underperform quite heavily. Within elite, he's a lot better, definitely rising up closer towards the A tier, or even S tier in certain situations. But when Kaenic Rooken can be quite oppressive as an answer to Rumble, that combined with just the skill needed to play this champion well, managing your heat correctly, you're oftentimes running Ignite, which can be a lot more punishing if you are less proficient at the game. I just wouldn't recommend him as a pick, but he's definitely a higher C tier option, not quite as bad as some of the other options or as niche. Akali is going to stay within the C tier. She got buffed this patch. She's definitely towards the higher end of the C tier, but the buffs definitely did help her a lot more within the mid lane. Once again, within the top lane, she's more of a niche pick, so she stays within the C tier. Smolder is also going to stay within the C tier. He still sees some play within top lane, even though it is beginning to dwindle at this point. He still functions on a variety of builds, just not to the same level of success. However, if you are able to get to your 225 execute point, he is still a very powerful champion. It can just be very punishing to try and get there. Kennen, I'm not a Kennen fan. This champion feels really bad to play at the moment. The loss of Night Harvester and old Protobelt definitely did hurt him. This season, he just doesn't function as well on the same kind of builds. Storm Surge just it feels nice if you're running into very squishy comps and you're snowballing, but oftentimes finding that consistency in snowballing can be quite punishing. Shadow Flame just isn't as good as a lot of his other options as of last season, and it's just put him in a pretty bad spot at the moment, so he is in the C tier for the time being. Moving on to the B tier, Ryze is going to make his appearance. This is the comeback of Ryze. Ryze has always been a very solid top laner. Last season, I'm pretty sure I promoted it quite often. Ryze and Azir as being very good picks and should see play. Of course, he was kind of underperforming this season. Now that he's been buffed, I would once again recommend Ryze top. If you put the time into him, he can be very rewarding to play. I'm gonna precautionarily put him in the B tier, but yeah, there's definitely power with this pick. He's a high B tier option, if anything. But yeah, Roa, Seraphs, I imagine you can operate on things like Cosmic. You don't. Rabadon's also functions quite nice in this champion. I just wouldn't recommend going Tank Rice that much anymore. It doesn't tend to function as well, especially with like Frozen Heart being nerfed and some of the other magic resist options not being as optimal. Yeah, Rise in this case, beta, solid AP mage, has a good time against a lot of the top lane matchups. Sylas is going to be in my B tier as well. Once again, Sylas is still a very strong answer to certain champions. Of course, Malphite being the key one here. Blinding Sylas, not recommendable, but has more flex value, of course, being buffed towards jungle, 2 patches in a row now. He's just not finding a huge amount of success there. But top lane, he's more of a B tier pick. Udyr, honestly, just struggling generalistically as a top lane tank. He just does. He's definitely one of the more high skill options. Being able to cycle your awakened forms and like utilize your abilities at the correct moments. Udyr is also very much focused on like wave manipulation. If you can manipulate your wave correctly, get crashes at the right time, force dives, proxy waves, stuff like this. He can be very impressive to play against, but oftentimes you're not going to find that level of coordination, and that's why he is within the B tier. Vladimir, not as strong as he was at the beginning of the season, has definitely fallen off over time. He now sits within the B tier. He's a solid top mid AP option, but not really as good top as in mid, where he's finding a bit more success. Jace is going to be within my B tier. He's doing fine at the moment. I spoke about it last time about the Manamune stuff and like whether it might just be the play to not go Manamune these days. I still haven't done a huge amount of research into this. It's still something which definitely needs to be looked into more, whether you can afford to skip this item, whether it's actually just punishing to go Manamune instead of like a lethality option where you could be scaling things like your Schroeder's Grudge a lot more. There is still some maths to be done there, and I would recommend looking into that before playing Jace. You might be able to get some free LP, those possibilities. But Jace as a champion at the moment is a solid pick. He is definitely more on the high skill side of things, which is why he is within my beta. But as like a poke AD option, he's one of the best you can get, and he is a solid B tier pick. Twisted Fate, of course, we still see Twisted Fate AD within pro play a bit. It's not quite as successful within solo queue, however, it is a solid option still. If you can lane bully effectively on this champion and you're like abusing the fact that you have a really good auto attack reset in your W, which can be really punishing to play against, then there is definitely merit to this champion. But for the most part, I'd recommend other lane bullies over Twisted Fate, which can be easier to pilot and aren't as punishing to play later on into the game, where Twisted Fate can definitely struggle against some comps which can like punish him a lot more. Yone is going to be with my B tier. Yone, of course, still an elite skew pick. He's a solid AD top lane option. If you're looking for something with a bit more carry potential, then Yone is still a great option. He is still answered by a lot of the top lane. Things like Juggernauts can sometimes, I mean, for the most part, can overwhelm you if you're not able to get an advantage early on to the game. If you can get your jungle to help you, or you can get those advantages, then yeah, there is definitely merit to this champion. But for the most part, he tends to be pretty hard to pilot. He can be quite punishing to play early on to the game. Mid-game tends to be not as hard. You tend to be able to either stat check if you're ahead, or you will just end up feeding in a lot of circumstances. It can be very hard to navigate fights from behind, as he is a squishy champion who is very much reliant on all-inning. But yeah, Yone, solid B2 option. Gangplank, very high skill pick. You need to be using your barrels effectively to really have any reason to pick this champion. Oftentimes you don't see like the triple barrel combos or the double barrel combos within mid-elo, and I wouldn't really recommend playing this champion unless you know the combos, as you are losing so much value in this pick. But Gangplank, still a solid option. He's a lot easier to play with like Essence Reaver, where you can just get like continuously Q spam and you can like output a lot of DPS with that. But for the most part, unless you can land the barrels, don't play Gangplank. Riven is going to be with my B tier. Also kind of akin to Gangplank, very high skill champion, very reliant on her auto attack resets. If you're not able to like consistently get your auto attacks weaved in with your Qs, then you are losing a lot of DPS output, and once again, not usually worth playing the champion. But if you put the practice in, Riven is a very rewarding champion to play, and definitely has a lot of merit. Solid AD Bruiser frontline option, Bruiser Assassin Skirmisher hybrid kind of thing. But yeah, Riven, B tier at the moment, but if you put the games in, definitely rises up. Volibear, I'm not a huge fan of Volibear in his current state. Within the top lane, within jungle, he's a lot more viable. Of course, the Q movement speed massively benefited him there. But over time, of course, we've seen lots of nerfs towards Volibear, which have definitely affected him within top as well. The Drain Tank build, I've said it before, it pushes him more towards being stronger mid to late game, when Volibear as a champion wants to be strong early on into the game. There is more merit towards the AP build within this space, where you can spike a lot harder of things like Nashers, Riftmaker, Hullbreaker, where you're able to just really be really oppressive and just outstat check most top laners, who oftentimes can be just surprised by your damage. Volibear, in his current state though, more of a B tier option. Both builds can function top lane, but neither of them really exceed kind of what they what kind of like other top laners can provide. Pantheon, also going to be my B tier. Pantheon is still a solid option. Of course, he's a bit weaker with the items this season compared to last season, where it's a lot more where things like Schroeder's Grudge were a lot more optimal on him, and he could abuse it a lot easier. He doesn't quite have that same kind of diversity of builds this season, and it definitely feels punishing to play him in a lot of situations. Of course, things like Sundered Sky can be quite nice on him if you're going down like a more bruisery options, Eclipse, Sundered Sky, Steric, stuff like that. I mean, yeah, he can operate as like a mid to front line option. He just doesn't have the durability that a lot of other bruisers provide. Things like Renekton, for example. Moving on, so Ornn is also going to be my B tier. I wouldn't recommend playing Ornn until they do fix the fact that ornaments aren't. Sometimes you just can't get all your ornaments in a game, which can be very frustrating to play and can lose like a lot of value in this champion. Of course, if you put time into playing Ornn, you learn his combos like Triple Brittle, you watch Macro. I mean, I'd recommend watching Macro if you want to learn how to play Ornn effectively. He also does a great guide. If you're, he has a great Ornn guide, which can like explain all the rune and item choices to a lot of the matchups, which can be very benefiting and helping you climb. But yeah, Ornn for the most part going to be within the B tier. Yorick also going to be in my B tier. He is still stronger on the bruiser options compared to the lethality options. I would recommend going the bruiser builds in most situations. Lethality does still have a place and can still function in certain lanes where you are able to consistently land E and you can make value of like lethality items, but more often than not, if you want something more generalistic, go bruiser Yorick. Sion, of course, we've begun to see lane swaps again. It's pretty fun if you play it. I played a couple games of lane swap where I've just funneled a lot of resources into my ADC, and we've sometimes just won games in 15 minutes. If you can like abuse lane swaps, then there is merit here, but you are very rarely going to be able to put yourself in a position where like everyone on your team understands what their functionality is and plays it correctly. So I'm gonna rate Sion based on like more generalistic play. He is more of a B tier option. He's still a solid frontline pick, and he can output a huge amount of DPS if you are able to get an advantage, pick up things like Titanic, Steric, stuff like this. Heartsteel, of course, kind of falls within that bracket. But if you want more generalistic tank, you can just go things like Sunfire into like Kaenic Rukun, into like more defensive options. Rek'Sai is going to also be on my B tier. She's a lot weaker post nerf than she was pre nerf, where she was like an S+ lane holder. Like you just couldn't move Rek'Sai up lane. Of course, they've massively nerfed her sustain within lane, and it's kind of left her as more of a B tier pick. She's still a solid frontline option. It still operates like a tank, but nowhere near as unmovable in lane as she used to be. Same goes for Gragas. They nerfed Gragas not too long ago. Of course, Gragas is more of an elite skewed pick, but nerfing his Q mana cost and his base health definitely did hurt him in terms of what he wants to be, like this unmovable laner. Now a lot of matchups can feel quite punishing to play as Gragas if you are not able to sustain through them. And thus he is within the B tier. Also, of course, very elite skewed. Tends to be a lot better within higher elos. Gwen going to be within my B tier. A solid AP hyper carry. One of the like more niche options within the top lane. We don't have a huge amount of AP hyper carries. Kayle, I guess, kind of fits the bill. But I'm going to talk about Kayle in a minute. There are some like hidden tech things which I'd really recommend kind of going on Kayle at the moment. But yeah, Gwen kind of feels an interesting niche. Not doing too well at the moment, but like it's still a solid answer to a lot of tanks. Does struggle into a lot more bruiser options, which she can very much be punished in. But yeah, solid B tier pick. Rengar going to be within the B tier. Rengar top tends to be a bit easier to play than Rengar jungle, but still it's getting close to the C tier. When you're running Rengar top, you want to be running things like the Fleet, the Grasp. You're going a bit more bruisery. You're acting as like this engage, disengage frontline option where you can do a decent amount of damage. Sometimes even threaten one shots on ADCs if you have the advantage, and like you are fed within the game. But for the most part, he tends to be a bit harder to play than a lot of other options, not as consistent, and I'd really recommend putting a lot of games in if you are picking this champion. Heimerdinger, not finding as much success this season as last season, definitely benefited from like Leandri's having Leandri's being like a mana option. He really valued that item. Of course, Rylai's still the same, still very nice on Heimerdinger. It definitely benefits from an item like that. He's still a fine option. Honestly, like a solid AP damage threat can be quite interesting, can create quite interesting lane states where you can like perma-threat an enemy under tower, or perma just hold waves and just be this really big just damage output threat. So yeah, Cho'Gath is going to be with my B tier as well. He is still a solid frontline option. You are looking at things like Grasp, Emax over things like Comet, Qmax. Of course, W got buffed earlier on the earlier ranks, so you're no longer as incentivized to max W second. Qmax tends to be what you go second on tank, even because of the W changes. But yeah, Tank Cho, solid option. AP Cho doesn't really exist anymore. He just doesn't really function on the AP builds at the moment. But he doesn't have like the items he needs, like Everforce for example. But yeah, AP Cho, Tank Cho, solid B tier option. Moving on to the A tier, so I put Galio here and then took Galio off because no one's playing him once again. Galio is a great option, should probably be within the A tier, but once again, no one really plays this pick, so it would more just be like single target catering. And yeah, I'll just talk about the Galio, solid A tier pick. You're looking at things like a durable like hybrid AP tank build where you're going like Ghost TP with Aftershock or Face Rush. So Akshan is going to be my first champion in the A tier. He is a solid AD lane bully. Of course, there's lots of item variations he can go. However, I'd recommend going like the Kraken Collector IE kind of build. That tends to be where he finds a lot of success. Wukong, going to be on my A tier. This is things like Eclipse into Trinity. Wukong, he's fairly successful on these builds. Yeah, it'd be like Eclipse, Trinity, Eclipse, Trinity, Synod Sky, Starrick, Shojin. You can kind of like run with that and find decent amounts of success. He tends to be a bit better into AD matchups. Of course, the passive benefits him by giving him armor in those. But yeah, very solid AD A tier option. Singe going to be with my A tier, of course. Bit more of a niche playstyle here, but definitely has merits in the fact that he creates like unique proxy kind of situations. Like it can be very obnoxious to play against, and if you understand how to play like the proxy correctly and execute, come back to lane, like you're running things like Dark Seal early and then just having like the boots for tempo advantage. There's strengths there. Of course, you do need to put the games into Singe to kind of understand where you want to be like when you want to be proxying and when you want to just be standard laning. Of course, he can still function on both. But yeah, Singe a solid AP A tier option. Quinn is getting close to the B tier. She actually lost quite a bit with Static being nerfed, and of course, Yomu's was already weaker on her because she was a ranged champion, and Yomu's got nerfed for ranged champions. So yeah, she's getting quite close to the B tier. Of course, she is still a solid AD lane bully. Not as effective later on into the game, unless you are like very far ahead when you can like kind of spike off your items and be a real like side lane nuisance, but more of a low A tier option at the moment. Vayne going to be on my A tier. We saw Zeus play 2 games in the LCK now of Vayne top. It looked very nice in both. Was very effective against the lanes which it was in, and was able to scale up, be very mobile in fights, output a huge amount of damage. This of course was the Fleet, Flash Ghost, Stormrazor build, which I would recommend within top lane. You don't tend to find as much success on the anti-tank, lethal tempo, Kraken Ginsu's build, which tends to be a bit better within the ADC role. But yeah, Vayne top, still a solid A tier option. Poppy is also going to be my A tier. Definitely more of a counter pick when you want to be playing the champion. As a blind, she has a lot of answers which can kind of neutralize her and just outscale, or she's not able to effectively get her W on them. But yeah, Poppy still works quite nicely on both AD and AD bruiser and tank builds. I'd recommend going Sundered Sky though. The champion is really solid on that item, especially if you are ahead. Radia is also going to my A tier. She spikes very hard off Bork into Wit's End or Bork off into Sundered Sky. Has decent matchups against a lot of champions. Of course, once again, you kind of want to be running her as a counter pick, putting the games in. She's a pretty hard to play champion, but a solid A tier option. Fiora, no longer S tier these days. She got nerfed pretty hard back when back 2 patches ago, I believe. Lost a bit of power, isn't able to as consistently find lane advantages, and thus she now kind of sits towards the low end of the A tier, but she's still a solid pick. Very good counter into a lot of tanks and certain bruisers which she can like utilize parry against. Tryndamere is also going to be on my A tier. So Tryndamere is doing a lot better after his buffs. He got buffed fairly recently, I believe. Gained a bit of attack speed growth. Of course, very nice on things like Kraken. The Navori buffs definitely did help him. And he's able to more consistently find advantages. And yeah, he's a solid A tier option. Jax, very solid to a lot of the ranged picks. If you're able to consistently land Counter-Strike and you're able to kind of like abuse this ability in like the matchups which he wants to play, then he's very strong. I'd recommend looking at things like Fleet at the moment. He seems to be finding a lot of success with Fleet. It's not something you want to run in every game. Sometimes you do need Lethal Temper and you're able to consistently stack it and maintain it. Then it is really good in most situations, but Fleet is definitely a solid option and definitely underrun at the moment. Renekton, a solid A tier option, got buffed a couple patches ago, and once again maintains this solid generic like go-to bruiser option, along with the likes of Aatrox, who is also going to be next to him. Aatrox, of course, you're going things more like Profane Hydra, Edge of Night, Schroeder's Grudge. However, you can go Profane Hydra into more bruisery options, and you can still find a lot of success on both builds. Just be wary, Aatrox isn't as strong like on your first 3 levels as a lot of people do perceive him. That can be a space where you are very punishable. Once you hit like thresholds on your Q, like you're getting 0.4, 0.5, and that ability is doing a bit more damage, then he can be a lot stronger within lane, and oftentimes just win lane at those kind of spikes. Moving on, so Alawi and Shen, I'm actually going to put these two both in here. So Shen, I'll sort of Alawi. So Alawi is definitely performing quite well on things like Sky at the moment. Not as bound to Iceborne Gauntlet as she used to be. Of course, she got changed more recently to have her tentacles have a bit more range, and then she got the compensation nerfed back down. She's still performing quite well at the moment. If you're able to pick into matchups where you are able to consistently land E and just punish laners and like force them to be locked under a turret, oftentimes forcing them to miss farm, otherwise they get punished quite heavily, then she can be very strong in those situations and a solid A tier option. Shen's been buffed twice, I believe. He had the base AD going up by 4, and he had the passive shield being linear scaling, which has helped him quite a lot. It means he can rotate more shield cooldowns, more with the AD going up, it means he can fight more frequently and win out on trades. And yeah, it's definitely helped him. It's put him in a very solid spot. You can go Heartsteel, and I oftentimes very much recommend it if you are able to consistently get stacks. However, you can still go things like Sunfires. Titanic Hydra tends to be pretty bait on this champion at this point. It doesn't seem to find anywhere near the same amount of success. But yeah, Heartsteel Shen, solid A tier, close to S tier option. Moving on, so Warwick is also going to be my A tier. Warwick's still a solid pick. Flash Barrier tends to be what you go. Your main kind of thing is the fact that you are very oppressive in lane. And oftentimes that can like create like really big advantages and make it very hard for a lot of top laners to lane against you. That is kind of where you want to be picking him, where you are able to consistently find these advantages. Of course, he can function on things like Bork, Titanic Hydra, Stride Breaker seems to be something which can some people are going. Sterix, Sundered Sky, later on into your build, also very solid options. He does fall off with game time. He can be blown up later on into the game and is better in single target environments, but yeah, a solid A tier pick. Yeah, pretty strong in certain situations. Darius is also going to be my A tier. So Darius, very solid, elite skewed AD bruiser. He doesn't tend to be as effective within low elo. Once you put the games in and you like understand your win con, like you need to close out games early, where you want to be like utilizing your power, where you do spike throughout the game, then he does become a lot better within those environments. But I've seen multiple builds kind of pop up all of a sudden. So like Steric Rush seems to be what some people are recommending. I've also seen Eclipse Rush as an option on Darius. If you want something a bit more standard, of course, Stride, Trinity are both still solid items. Stride very nice for like chasing down targets. Sterix is a solid follow-up item. Sin Sky can function on this champion, but you can oftentimes just go into more tanky builds. Things like Deadman's very nice for Darius. And yeah, there's a lot of power there. Teemo also going to be my A tier. So Teemo is a very solid AP scaling pick. Tends to be a bit more low elo skewed, but has very powerful kiting and can abuse that against a lot of top laners. Time Kench also going to be my A tier. Benefited from a heart still being buffed a couple of patches ago. He's definitely low elo skewed. You don't really see this champion past Diamond into low Masters. He tends to kind of fall off at that point. People understand like what the champion does, how it functions, like dodge Tongue Lash, and he tends to be a lot weaker as a pick. But yeah, if you're able to consistently land Tongue Lash, his Q, and you're able to consistently get Heartsteel procs, then yes, he is a very solid low elo pick. Close to the S tier, if anything. Olaf is going to be my A tier. Very oppressive against a lot of tanks. If you're in a matchup which can't really fight him, then you should go Phase Rush against Olaf. But yeah, Olaf has a lot of winning matchups. He can be very oppressive to play against, especially if he does develop an advantage. Of course, he's been buffed in the jungle again this patch. It's definitely helped him, like poach things like Krogs, things like Gromp, if he's able to get lane advantage. He pairs really nicely with Enchanters, and there's a lot of merit to playing a pick like Olaf. Cassiopeia going to be my S tier. Cassiopeia's kiting and her damage like makes her really effective within the top lane. It's very hard to catch a Cassie, especially with the longer lane. She can be just really hard to play against, and that kind of is one of the main merits of this pick. She tends to be a lot easier to play as well. Like the sustain of the QE can give her a bit more of a safety net compared to things like Twisted Fate, which can be quite punishing if you do find yourself being like autoed by minions a lot, or the enemy top lane is able to like resist your poke. Cassiopeia doesn't really have that like much of an issue. Of course, Tyr is still a very strong item on her. She gets the full 6 items, as she doesn't get boots, obviously. And yeah, there's lots of strong items for her to go at the moment. Things like Archangels, Roa, Rylai, Rabadon, Cosmic, stuff like this, all really nice on Cassiopeia, and a very solid S tier option. Zac is actually going to drop down to the A tier. I was supposed to move him down a second ago, but yeah, Zac is now going to be within my A tier. He had his health regen nerfed this patch. It makes him a lot more punishing to play if he's not able to consistently pick up his blobs. If you're playing against Zac, please pick up the blobs. It makes him significantly weaker as a champion. Like, he's not able to consistently rotate his W as much. He, of course, now has really low health regen, which makes him quite hard to play against champions that are able to consistently poke him out. And thus, he now drops down to the A tier. Still a solid AP tank option, though. Does output a lot of damage. KO. So, KO has some new builds which are kind of popping up. If you want to follow like solid ranged top laner builds, then Kerberos is someone who I'd very much recommend. But the current iteration seems to be like Kraken alongside a lot of movement speed options. Of course, Kraken the level was pushed towards level scaling towards the beginning of this season, I believe, at this point. But yeah, like you go Kraken into lots of movement speed options. You run like your Swifties, and then yeah, like I've seen things like Hullbreaker, Warmogs being like really solid options later on to the build. Things like Stormrazor can be things you can opt into. But yeah, Kerberos did a really good guide on it. I'd recommend checking that out. But it's kind of like the tech with Kale at the moment. Of course, AP is still very solid. If you want like a solid AP scaling threat, then Kale can still fulfill that. But now she has like solid build diversity, and oftentimes that can be really good as like a top lane option to have this build diversity. So yeah, solid S tier option. Malphite, very simplistic to play, great counterpick to a lot of AD matchups. Of course, Jace is the main one here. Jace cannot play into Malphite. That matchup is very hard for him, and Malphite's ability to just resist and just harass him with Q can be really oppressive. But yeah, Malphite, generalistically, very strong against a lot of the top laners. If there aren't a lot of AP threats, then this pick definitely goes up in merit. Camille also performing really well in the top lane at the moment. Honestly, probably the best high school top laner you can play. She got buffed. She got buffed away from support to be better within the top lane, and it's just given her so much power. Like, her early game isn't as bad as it used to be, and she does scale really well. Like, her mid to late game are still very strong points for this champion. Spikes really nicely off the Trinity, Ravenous, and then like Steric, Synod Sky, Shojin items. Performs really well off these, and yeah, great S tier option. Set also going to be my S tier. Once again, still probably surprises a lot of people, but Set is in a very good spot at the moment. Spikes really nicely off things like Stride Breaker and then Bruiser options. They all work really nicely on him, and yeah, it's just put him in a really good spot. Fairly simplistic to play. Good lane AD bully as well. Mordekaiser. So Mordekaiser is a pretty hot topic this patch, but he got changed so his ult can no longer be Q accessible. And he lost win rate. Who would have guessed? Of course, this was inevitable. Oftentimes, QSS was bait in a lot of situations against Mordekaiser. And when Mordekaiser was able to be QSS against, or like when you want QSS against Mordekaiser, oftentimes the Mordekaiser was already so far ahead and was most likely going to win the game. Now that you're no longer picking this up as much, yeah, Mordekaiser's win rate has gone down a bit, but he's still a very solid S tier option. Great into lots of tank matchups, very simplistic to play. But yeah, it was pretty funny to see how that like whole saga kind of rounded out. Garen is going to be my S tier, so Garen is a very solid AD option at the moment, very simplistic to play, great across all kind of like periods of the game. You can go things like Stride Breaker, Phantom Dancer, Stride Breaker into Death's Dance. Those tend to be like his main kind of like core options. But yeah, you can function quite nicely on a couple of builds. Of course, crit options are nice if you're snowballing, and yeah, very solid S tier champion. Nasus also going to be my S tier, so Nasus got buffed a couple, I believe, a patch ago, and it's really benefited him. Of course, he's pretty hard to move out of lane at this point. His life still went up on his passive. He's running things like Fleet. You are able to consistently clear waves in a lot of situation. You're just not going to get punished in mid elo for playing this pick, which is oftentimes why he is a bit weaker with an elite play where you are more consistently being doved. And yeah, Nasus a great mid elo pick at the moment. Trundle also a great mid elo pick, a great split pusher, kind of akin to Nasus. Can just stat check you in most situations of the game. Of course, Nasus is a bit more 6 later on reliant. Trundle is a bit more item reliant and a bit more matchup dependent, but still a very solid pick. Great split pushing, great itemization at the moment. So we've left with 5 champions here. So Clyde is going to wrap up the S tier. Actually, no, I'll put Clyde and Skarner in the S tier. So Skarner's very close to the S plus tier, but not quite there at the moment. I believe if people put a couple more games into him, then yeah, he probably spikes up into the S plus tier. But yeah, Clyde, this is like the Profane Hydra build. He's doing really well once again on the lethality options. This was kind of what was happening last season, but it's kind of happening again this season. Of course, you can still operate on like hybrid lethality bruiser. It can function in a lot of situations and still a great pick. In Skarner's case, they overdid it. They massively buffed his Q, and it means that he's just a bit too stat checky at the moment and can be really oppressive to play in lane. Of course, you're no longer going like the Arcane Comet W max variation as much. You can still operate on like Arcane Comet Q max, like into range matchups, but yeah, you're mostly going like your Grasp, your Q-Max, and you're able to just start check a lot of champions and scale really nicely throughout the game. Of course, you do want to be going Heart still, so you can itemize, so you get the health benefit on your health ratios. Graves is going to be my D tier. Yeah, I held on to Graves. I completely forgot I had added him. Graves is not performing very well in the top lane, but he has seen a bit of a spike in play. He'll probably get removed next patch, but yeah, for the most part, he's a D tier pick at the moment. He's struggling to find success on like the crit variation. I've tried it once, but yeah, I tried the Stormrazor. What did I try? I tried Stormrazor IE and then like Shieldbow LDR BT, I think. Or I might have had an RFC in that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, it wasn't performing as well as I hoped it would. He still struggles within lane. Like, you still have the mana problems. He can oftentimes just lose to enemy, like outstat checking him, and he's more of like a wave clear, like scale for late bot. But yeah, he's not performing well in the top lane. He's more of a D tier pick. And yeah, I got Mundo, still going to be my S plus champions. Both these champions aren't actually banned a huge amount, but they are very good at stat checking you. They spike really hard in the mid game. In Mundo's case, he spikes really hard mid game. It's pretty unmovable early game and has a really solid late game. In Argot's case, he's a bit better mid game, but it does tend to fall off like late game, but can still operate late game. Still a fine champion early game. Of course, if you're able to consistently land E, then you can win most matchups through that. But yeah, Mundo is probably my go-to low to mid elo option at the moment. Does fall off a bit more in high elo. Of course, so does Argot, but yeah, both these options very solid at the moment. Great picks in a lot of situations. For Argot, I'd recommend the Hullbreaker, Cleaver, Starrock, Jackshot build. In Mundo's case, you can oftentimes just go Heartsteel into Sunfire, and then you've got like a variety of tank options you can opt into. But yeah, both these champions performing very well at the moment. Very solid S plus tier picks, and definitely what I recommend going to. Yeah, those are my thoughts. So, thank you for watching. See you next one. Goodbye.